don't like it. We just wanted to get an idea of, in the room, like how many people are completely new to this. Put your hand up now, just so we can get a sense. Cool. Nobody? Oh, go straight at the deep end then. Good answer. Well, we want this to be really interactive, so we want people to be able to ask questions or share insights that they've seen. So we'll both do a brief introduction of ourselves for those of you that don't know us, and then we'd like to open up to questions because we want to kind of gear it around what people are interested in. So the topic is well-being, which is pretty broad. So, did you want to go first in the introduction?
Okay. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Shaddock, and I live in Plymouth in the southwest of England. And I'm fairly new to the principles, really. I came across the principles in this way, because I think they've always been around in a different format. But the three principles formally and traditionally about 3 or 4 years ago. And since then I've been learning and opening and blossoming, and I work individually with people. I've worked as a counsellor and psychotherapist for a few years, but now obviously do that in a very new way in the principles. And I also work as a holistic therapist and do a lot of massage and sports therapy. And I'm also a funeral celebrant. And to the best of my abilities, I try and gently work with the principles in each of those fields.
So I'm Jenny Anderson now, and I've kind of been around the principles, I think it's nearly 11 years, and I still feel like I'm new, and I still hear something very different every time I hear people speak about it. I guess for me, I came across this, and it was more of a personal thing. It was about me seeing something for myself, which completely changed my life. So I didn't come at it already trained in many things. I hadn't trained in anything else. And the principles kind of took me from feeling completely limited and anxious, depressed, worried about life, to an excitement or an idea of this potential or possibility. So over the last 11 years, like I look back at my videos and I realise the way that I talk about it completely changes. So we're talking about something that's constant, but the way that we see it changes and moves. And I disagree with so many things that I've said before. And there's so many times we've thought we might take those videos down, but it seems that whatever we're seeing in the moment that's new and fresh for us can be really helpful to someone else. And sometimes the way that I see it now might not relate to that person. So it's been nice to be able to see that as we're learning for ourselves, we can share that with other people. It was kind of cool doing the plenary today and then having Jack there, because he was one of my first teachers. And as he said, like I remembered sitting in the room with him, the event that Sue had arranged, and just not being able to speak. So the principal had helped me so much to feel better, and I wasn't so shy anymore. But in this group of maybe 20, 30 people, with Jack Pransky, who was the American facilitator, I couldn't speak. It was just... So then sitting next to him on stage and realising the jump that's happened and how comfortable I can now feel in front of a room. And not always, because I was nervous beforehand and I get clammy hands, but to just realise that just because I feel uncomfortable or anxious, it doesn't mean you don't have to live, you don't have to do stuff. So in a way, I think that's how I see well-being. Initially, when I used to think about the principles on well-being, it was about getting to a point where you were well all the time, so mentally well all the time, and I thought that meant having good experiences all the time and not taking your thinking seriously and seeing the principles in action. Whereas more and more I'm realising the well-being is coming from seeing that as human beings we have all different experiences and none of them are to be feared. And I think the fear comes when we misunderstand what they mean or think that they work a way that they don't. So I don't know, I know that when I first came across this, I was waiting to get to the point where I understood it enough that I was happy all the time, or I was seeing it all the time. And even though all the teachers that have been around this say, sometimes they see it and sometimes they don't. We kind of see them on stage and think they look so relaxed and comfortable, they must be like that all the time. But it really is true that everyone who shares is being honest. They're human beings, this is the human experience, and there's nowhere to get to, there's no kind of level, there's no, oh, I'm new so I don't know as much as you, because I know that sometimes I have conversations with people on the break and I see that they've seen something about the principles that I haven't seen, and it feels like it's a two-way learning, which is again why we want this to be interactive. We'd love to hear from people or take questions. I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Well, I guess that was really interesting, because sitting here feeling nervous and with clammy hands and feeling word for word, that was just kind of how life has unfolded for me. And I had also thought that having gone through training in lots of different therapies and being told that if I tapped enough in EFT, or if I sat like this in quantum release, or if I did enough NLP or any of these other therapies, I would one day get to a point where I wasn't anxious, wasn't afraid, wasn't depressed, which I'd been all my life, and then it would be okay. And I guess one of the first people who ever told me about the principles assured me, in a money-back guarantee kind of a way, that once you got the principles ping, that was it, definitely then you were always, in that peaceful state. And now I realise that it's okay not to hope for that, and yet when there are minutes of that unfolding, it's really delightful, and not to set that up for other people too, I guess. Yeah.
I think it's nice to know that there's the potential. There's a potential in any moment for us to see this, and that I'm not going to limit it, that it might be that we live in a time where this is seen all the time. But I know from my own experience, and that's all I can share from. And I think that's helpful for people, because I think we got so excited when this came over to the UK that it was just going to cure everything, and all you need to do is tell people about this thing and they were going to just recover and everything was going to be wonderful. But it's been wonderful being in it such a long time, because you just see people incrementally change and their life gets a bit easier, and people that were incredibly shy suddenly sharing, and people that wouldn't talk to you on the break suddenly talking to you. So you do see that there's something that's inbuilt in us that is evolving us and moving us, that it takes us in a direction, and it's nice to know that we've all got it within us. It's our own journey, or its own. And it's funny, because even saying journey, like there's something I'm seeing a lot recently about wellbeing, is that experience really is in the moment, and that's all there ever is. Because this idea of our past and our future, it doesn't exist, it is just now. So that in the moment, and I feel like I've, over this last year, sat in so many different feelings, like on the scale, like brilliant and then terrible, but there's been a sense of well-being within that. And I think before I thought well-being was something separate from having experience, something separate from those times that you were in this wonderful feeling, but to know that there could be well-being within any experience. I think I spoke about it earlier, like to just see that one of the things that kept occurring to us, in this moment I'm okay. And it wasn't trying to fight an experience or trying to change it. It wasn't trying to get to a higher level or move away from what was. And it feels like that childlike nature that we so often talk about, of going in and out of different experience without so much judgment and thought, and how rapidly they can move through that, seems to be allowed for us too. Like it's not something that's just within children, it's within all of us. But we kind of learn to, just overthink things, worry about things. And it feels like that's just naturally fallen away more, in and out of different experience. And when you're in it, it's real. If you're stressed, you're feeling stressed because that's what you're experiencing. And then in the next moment, you can be in another experience. Whereas before, it's like if you're in a certain experience and this one hangs around. If I started to feel depressed and I know this one well, this one lasts. Whereas now it's like in and out of different experience. And that to me is well-being.
Yes, and to see that in action in other people. I've been foiled so many times lately in that trick that says, you know, if we're going to work in this way, I'm going to do something for somebody else. I'm going to tell them about the principles. And then when we go quiet, or they just tell us about their well-being. The other day I popped onto Facebook and I was seeing a few entries that people had put on and was feeling a bit envious in a kind of a way. Oh yes, that person's put it the best, and I'm not sure I've ever said it quite like that. And what is it about the principles that really puts it in a nutshell, and this is a message we've got to pass on? And I scrolled down a bit past many posts of people in the principles community, and my cousin in America's wife had put something on. Now, you know, we've never had a conversation about this. I don't know that she's ever been introduced to anything like it. And she puts on this beautiful post. I was out running, training for a marathon this morning, and as I passed all these wonderful people and we smiled at each other and I looked at the autumn leaves, etc., etc., I was suddenly struck of the wonderful innate health of each and every person on this planet. And there was my teacher, you know, in that moment. We've got nothing to demand from others or insist upon, or nothing to give really, except to notice when this wonderful nature unfolds and bubbles up in human beings.
Have you got any questions or comments or anything that's come up for people over the day today?
You were saying about depression and how this big one that lasts. I've found the same thing in a way, that before I was depressed and it went on and it went on and it went on for weeks on end, and it got worse and worse and worse. Now, if I have a bad day, I don't call it depression anymore. If I have a bad day, I don't have to look forward to another bad day tomorrow. And for me, that's the miracle.
That's huge. I think I like what you were pointing to, is that this is already within everyone, and I love how the principles are shared and the simplicity, but just realising that it's within every human being already, and that sometimes it doesn't take much to connect with that and sort of and see it. And I know I've definitely kind of got pretty arrogant at different times, thinking that I had something to tell people, that I knew best, and actually probably mostly with my sister's husband. And I've apologised to him because I say, oh God, if you just understood the principles, your life would be so much better. God, what you're talking about is ridiculous. And some of the stuff he's spoken about now, I'm starting to have a different understanding for, and it makes much more sense. But when I got my own arrogance that I had something, and I knew the secret to life, and I didn't even know I was doing that. I felt like I was in service to the world. People needed to know this. And it's interesting because me and him have had some incredible conversations now, and it's so much more open, because I'm not judging him as I'm speaking to him, thinking I've got something better than you, or I know something you don't. And it's like you're saying, your cousin's wife, it's within us. But it's, and I remember talking to someone about this, I said, what's the point in the conversation then? What's the point in teaching the principles, sharing the principles? I said, but all I can say is that looking around, people learning about this, it seems to ignite that.
That's lovely, and that's really rich, because I've often wondered about that, but I just kind of know that something of this love that we hold and celebrate really does ignite something, if you want to call it that, really. That just witnessing this morning was amazing. You know, it's lovely when these things kind of merge in this minute. I'm not sure which of those two incredible breakout groups it was this morning. I'm just trying to think in this moment which one it was that we were talking about well-being, So well-being was being spoken about at the front, two people sitting at the front, just telling stories, just speaking words, just pointing, just sharing what they know. And there were kind of, miracles popping up because people were bringing mirror statements and unfoldings of their own story. And the power of feeling behind me from somebody as they were having quite a moving moment was just incredible and said so much in silence. And the word miracle was used there just now, and I think we are witnesses of miracles, really. That's what I would say. That I feel myself that a miracle has unfolded in me. I was always looking for one on the outside. But it is something to do with sharing this truth, this wonder of life that we do at different times, sense in ourselves, and it opens something else up in other people. And I don't know what it was that I heard specifically, somewhere along that sharing that there have been of going to different trainings, participating in different things, listening to different webinars. And then one day I was walking along with my dog, and I had an exchange with somebody in this room actually just a few minutes before, but I just got to the end of a road, and as I turned a corner, something just happened, something opened up, and I had a sense that life would never be the same again since that moment.
I think it goes to what we were talking about this morning with the power of thought, and it's like you can't put it into words. And I think that's what I've loved about how I've been seeing thought this year, is that I kind of thought I understood it, and I had my definition or my understanding of it, but my understanding is in words, because the way that we experience, the way that we feel is through language and words, and to see that we can shift without having the words, the language, we feel something's changed within us and we don't even know what it is. And it feels like in that moment you're kind of recognising the power of thought. And actually it's in any moment when we're having experience, that's the power of thought. But I think those moments are the ones that stand out to us because we haven't got the vocabulary for it. There's something that's different, something that's shifted. And that's the miracle, the magic. And I don't know, I was just out in America, and they had, we went and saw some of the giant redwoods, and you see where the fires kind of hit so many of them, but how resilient nature is, and how intelligent it is. And for me to start seeing the principles in nature more, I've made it so human. And it was like, wow, look at the intelligence in nature. And then as man had gone in and tried to stop the forest fires, and then they realised trees were dying out because they needed the fires. And for the giant sequoias, it kind of, I can't remember the details of it, I was listening to the talk. It did something really good for them. But it was just incredible to see the principles in nature. And there's something that David said to me, he goes, why do we separate ourselves from nature? Why do we think that we're so different? And I think over this last year, the principles have gone from being quite a human thing for me, even though I was aware that Sid spoke about them as universal, to like an everything. Like it's everything, it's everywhere. So I always felt like looking within was looking within myself. Whereas now I'm realising it's looking within life, looking within the principles, within truth, and that's in everywhere we look. And I was talking to, I think it was Chip at the conference, and I said, and you're looking at this view, and he goes, you can look at this table. And I realised what he was pointing to is, that's been envisioned by someone and then created. That's come from the power of thought. So to look for the principles and to look within isn't, I now realise, which probably is very obvious to a lot of people, looking at myself and how I'm doing. It feels like that's the opposite direction to where the principles is pointing us. Because the principles isn't about, in my experience of them at the moment, isn't about my personality and how I'm doing and how I'm feeling. And it feels like if we look there, we're kind of developing, or we're going to get better, or we're going to see something. It almost feels like it's the absence of doing that where we seem to grow. And I think spending more time just recognising that and looking at life, not looking at myself. And I know I've become slightly less obsessed than I used to be in myself when I had my eating disorders and things, but I still realise there's quite a lot of self-obsession going on. And it was innocent because it was around the principles. So I'm looking about the principles and how I'm doing with the principles. But I realised the changes were happening when I wasn't focusing on myself and the principles. It was happening when I was just living. And the principles is such a simple description of how life works. And again, overcomplicate it. But it feels like, when Sid did say to people, halfway through the first day of a conference, actually, go and have the afternoon off. And people are like, no, I want to get more. But it's so often in those moments when we're not sat in the room where we hear something. Because what we're hearing is coming from within us, not from the person speaking. And I know that can happen at any moment. So I still come to conferences and go to courses. I love speaking to people around this. So I see the importance. But I also see that it's just in life as well. It's in just ordinary life, just the ordinariness. And I guess as well, the other thing was like this idea of kind of a pursuit of being perfect. That's kind of fallen away. This isn't about that kind of perfection. Over to you.
To me, over to you.
Can I just say, Jonathan, that I love what you were saying about yourself doing all those things. I don't know, put the words through the principles, with the principles, whatever, but I really like to hear that, rather than us all becoming 3 principles, trainers and teachers and coaches, but actually all of those roles in life that are just are really important. You're doing it with that 3 principles understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. So is it really different? Do you find that you're showing up differently, like to the funeral celebrant work that you do, for instance?
I think in all of those ways. I see myself really these days as witnessing miracles. That's how I would put it, I suppose, that in any of those situations, it's being in touch with something that I was going to say has unfolded, but is unfolding in me, because I can't quite put words to it. It's all I know is there has been an amazing shift, because I used to just live in my head. There was a lot of noise unfolding all the time, and I called it anxiety, depression, nervousness, no goodness, and all that stuff. And then something happened, which I think had happened before, and I can think of a number of different ways in which something unfolded in me, but the noise in my head got back in the way again. But now, in this moment today, just recently, I feel that there's something very powerful unfolding within me, which I can't really put words to. But when I'm in touch with that, which I would call the unfolding of love, the principle of grace or of divine mind or whatever we wanted to call it, the soul of myself, touching who I really am beyond those stories, then when I'm in touch with that many, many times in all those different situations, I see amazing things unfolding, and it's nothing that I say really. So for instance, the other day, I don't want to make this sound as if it's egotistical, because I don't think it is. I spent many years trying to do things that might help people to feel better. I could see myself doing that within my own family, where my mother and others seemed to be sick all the time and always looking for something that was going to make them better. And I can see that part of my unfolding in life was taking on roles that might do that, offer something that was going to make people feel better. But now I really have a strong sense at the moment that I need to do nothing. You know, that it's nothing really about what we may say particularly, the word or the sentence or the paragraph or the talk at the funeral service or whatever it is, but that somehow when we touch that space that I would call divine inside of us, then we see miracles unfolding in other people.
Jenny, to follow on when you mentioned perfection and touching with St. Jonathan there. What had me in tears a few years ago, I was just reading a book, I'll spare you the details, but it basically touched to me and explained my whole anxiety and feeling of guilt that I should be doing something. And it's just simply said, you don't have to do anything, you just have to learn to be. And it almost feels like, from the direction of the principles, it's almost like this is like the motorway. There are lots of little avenues of niches or ways, philosophies, psychological techniques, but the avenue, what combines it was the avenue of these principles. But talking about your perfection, and then where you stepped out of your wellness, if that's the right way of putting it, when you felt, I have something you need to know. But that learning to be is, and Jonathan, as you said, that you don't have to do anything. You just have to be present. Because you're just allowing that space and inviting someone else into that same space. So you're not actually fixing anything, you're not actually healing anyone. You're just being that in that moment. And it reminds me a little bit of the Jungian's psychology, when they talk about unconscious patterns or projection. And it seems to be saying exactly the same thing, that when we are caught up in our thinking and the realness of it, and we put it outside. So the doing aspect, out of anxiety, out of fear, it seems to be, the three principles, it seems to be having a similar, or the same effect of just people realising where the source of their reality is, and letting go, just slightly, because when you identify with these concepts, and you've got a strong grip on this is who I am, this is what I do. It just allows you to loosen the grip a bit, and for some, the subjective experience is just so, such a milestone, and they get it instantly, and their lives are transformed. And in part, that was what happened to me, and then I discovered the three principles, and it kind of I re-experienced something as well. But what we're trying to say is again, just that point of perfection, is that when you're with others, is just seeing the wellness within them, regardless of the dramas, the stories, the narratives that we're holding on to or haven't quite learned to detach from in order to realise the illusion of it. And that's the greatest gift, I think. You don't need to do anything. You just need to be yourself. And that's the biggest gift you can get. And I think that's where the miracles come from. And the anecdotes, the sharing as well. For me, I get really emotional when I hear these stories, these anecdotes, these life-changing moments. And I get tickled to death to use somebody else's comments from years ago on I think it was a coloured lady from America that for 30 odd years she was a predator in life, stuck in her fighting me against the world mentality, and then she got it in an instant and she was totally transformed. But just being allowed, well, you're perfect the way you are, what's wrong with you? I can't see anything wrong with you. So, and that allows us to then start sharing and start talking, and just touching back on what Carl Jung was saying, that you're reaching into your own unconscious, or the stuff that you don't you're too frightened to look at. And you don't have to drudge up the past, you don't have to go through years of therapy and torture and reminding yourself of this happening at home. You're just allowed to let go of it enough and realise, oh, I'm holding on to it. It doesn't actually exist anymore. So I know, but yeah, just the perfection aspect of seeing the well-being within somebody else, irrespective of what their narrative is at that time. That's all I wanted to know.
Thank you. Yeah, because I think, I know that my first teacher, Roger Mills, one of the things that impacted me the most was that, yeah, I was presenting this character and I've got all these problems, and he was just talking to, there's nothing wrong with it. But it's funny because we're used to looking at the content of our lives and what we think is wrong with us and where we need to get to. Whereas what he saw was that, yeah, your discomfort is created the same way as your joy. So the way that you're operating, the way that you're working is the same, whatever you're experiencing. So that's what's not broken. Like, we can be living in a horrible place, but the way that we experience that is still the same as when we're enjoying life. Like, it's coming from the same place. But I think he's just complete, and it wasn't rude, it was like his complete disinterest in my story. I'm like, hang on a minute. If you really knew, then you'd see that I was a bit different and actually this is terrible. But he wasn't interested in my story. And that impacted me, and I couldn't talk about the principles. I couldn't even remember the 3 principles or the definitions, which drove my friends crazy, especially my friend who was studying psychology. She's like, well, how on earth has this changed you if you can't even remember what these principles are? I'm like, well, it was beyond words. And it was the opening of something, and I think I was grateful then for what I'd seen, and I didn't feel like I needed to see anything else. I was just so grateful to not feel as awful as I had before. But then I look back now to what I'd seen then, I'm like, wow, like I've had so many different experiences since then. I'm so grateful again. But to see that it might be in our lives that we feel moved to do things, or it's not that I think it can be misunderstood. There's nothing to do, do nothing. They're very different things. There's nothing to do with this operating system or this nature or these principles that are living us, because they're already living us and they always have been. But then in life we have this power of thought that brings new thought, ideas, inspiration, and then we can do that. Whereas before, like this whole do nothing thing, I was like, well, I'm just going to wait here until, and then what? And I think that was the thing. If I wasn't feeling very, if I was in a bad mood, I was thinking, well, no, just do nothing. There's nothing to do because it's bad. There's nothing wrong with a bad mood. I'm just going to sit here. It's like, well, if you're in a bad mood and something occurs, I just want to go for a walk. I just want to go and talk to someone. Do that. So that's for me, it was my misunderstanding that the principles is describing something already happening, that there's nothing for us to do. It's not personal. It's not about us doing the principles. And then I misunderstood that to mean that I should do nothing, and that things would just come, and you don't even need a website. So those kind of things would be practical if you wanted to coach, like maybe have a website, get out there or talk to people. But I've loved the learning, and I've loved the how light this can be. Like it isn't, and the whole event, the whole VIVA event in itself, I think, is set up in a way to express that, the lightness, that this isn't like a heavy study, and there's a real lightness around just being. And I think I used to try very hard to be, and I didn't realise how much doing there was in that. Like, I remember saying to Dave, like, I remember watching my sister, we arrived on the Isle of Wight for a holiday, so I think I was probably about 11 or 12, and she was a few years older. And we'd gone down to the beach before we were allowed into her house, and she was running along the beach and dancing and singing, and she looked so free and at ease. And I remember kind of trying to join in and be with her, but it was so mechanical, and it was so me trying to be natural, me trying to be in the moment. And I think that's the difference when you do find yourself just being to when you try to be. And I think that's the beauty of the principles, is pointing out that that's inbuilt in us, it's natural, it's innate.
And just to add another word, that innate word, although it gets to a point where words become pointless, is joy. It's just an ambience of joy. I think that's the word that coins it for me. It's just a joy where nothing external has changed. And it's not about turning a blind eye to stuff, because obviously there is stuff that needs addressing, or there would be the need to share our joy with it all around. But yeah, so that would be the word that I find, being joyful. I think that helps people. Can I share something? Yeah, fine, go ahead. Talk to me for it. Used to come. Sorry. But or another term, each one teach one. But you're not doing any teaching. You're just allowing someone else to enter that space by your own joy and being there. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Like one of my, I remember when I first came across this, following Gabriella around. I think I always talk about this, but just she wasn't Gabriella in the classroom and then Gabriella with her husband and then Gabriella with this person. She was just Gabriella, and it was the principles that just touched her and moved her so much that when she went out into life, that's just where she was coming from. And you could see people like kind of light up around her, and there is a teaching point, and I think I kind of got really caught up on that. I want to get my teaching point in there, but just seeing Gabriella's naturalness and how people kind of shifted and had insight and realised something for themselves around her made me realise that there isn't a way, there isn't a thing, there isn't something here to do or to give or to be. It's like, I think you were saying, you get to be yourself, and then that will show up in whatever your job is, whatever you're doing. And I think that is the difference with this. There's nothing to apply. It's almost we are the understanding that we have of what we've seen, and then we are that with people.
There's an irony, isn't it, that for a lot of people, some of their biggest insights, etc., like in the shower, or gardening, or out for a walk, or whatever. And so, as a teacher, you can, or facilitator, or whatever today's language is, you can get caught up in that. But of course, that's about, the little self, or the concept we have in our own head of who we are. And what I hear from like all these stories and what I hear out of you today is just wonderful, because it just strikes me over and over, you're seeing your true self, which is perfect. The irony being we fill our lives with concepts to try and get the concept of who we think we are to match that which is innate anyway. So like the whole well-being industry is ironic in a sense, because it's trying to force something from the outside, which in fact is already there, beautifully like a spark or whatever metaphor we want to use. You are a well-being.
Yeah, and I think very often we're just simply creating a space, offering a culture of quietness, really, where the wonder of these insights might unfold, because I've been so conscious of wanting to say the right thing or express the right thing in front of a client so they may get it. And then, as you so richly say, it's in the shower, it's in the bath, it's in a quiet walk where people have their insights. And I think we can open our hearts up and simply provide that sort of quiet space where they may unfold, and then we can celebrate it with them.
It's in shouting too. And it's in shouting too, because do you know what I mean? There's a sort of danger, and that suddenly we've just got to get very quiet all the time. I don't know about you, but you may have spotted I'm not quiet all the time, because that isn't how life threw me. So it's that always having an eye for that pigeonholing of turning something that's natural into a form to try and replicate with people. And the more I've seen that this year, the more I've seen the innocence of how I've tried to create quiet in the past, which can look quite funny, I can imagine. I can tease myself about it because it's entertaining. But just to see that sometimes when I'm kicking off, it's like, oh, sorry, whoops. And so life has no conditions for how it will reveal its true nature to you. It doesn't give a shit, fundamentally.
And I think, as well, times of gloominess and darkness are actually quite good for us. And for me, the well-being that I've got from just having a very small understanding of the principles is it doesn't matter how bad I feel about anything, I know that it won't last. And so I can't take it as seriously as I used to take it. When I felt dark and gloomy, and I felt that I was just stuck in it and I couldn't get out of it, and I would just go to bed for weeks on end. I didn't want to see anyone, I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I felt that I would be there forever. And that felt very real. And now I might still feel like that, but I can see an end to it. I know that it won't last. I know that it's just temporary. And there's a well-being in that I can almost give in to feeling dark and gloomy, because I know that it's okay, because actually I'm probably going to get something out of this. Maybe I'm just sort of retreating from the world for a bit because that's what I need to do, and it's not a bad thing. There's an end to it, there's a light. So I might not be able to see the light, but I know that it's there. And before I understood the principles, not that I do understand it very well, but I know that nothing lasts. It will come and it will go, and then I'll feel better. When I come through it, it will have been something that I've learned from and I've grown from, and I'll move on to another place because of that darkness.
And I liked how you said it as well, that there's, even when you're in it, it's almost you allow yourself to be in it because you're aware it's passing through.
I quite enjoy it actually these days. Even though I feel awful, I can enjoy it because I know there's an end to it. Whereas I used to just get stuck in it and think that I'd be there forever and I was never going to come out of it. But now I know that I will.
Yeah.
So it's okay, because that's part of life as well. We can't just be happy clappy all the time, can we?
That sounded to me and felt like a lovely celebration of the seasons, really.
Yeah.
You know, Jenny, you were talking just now about nature. I'm really aware how in my own life and my thinking about other people's lives in terms of the seasons, I've made them wrong. You know, I used to hate autumn and winter and keep telling myself so much about it, and that I wouldn't be all right in these periods. And suddenly, for the last couple of years, I've been in love with autumn and winter and seen and felt so many things that I never had experienced as beautiful before. There's nothing wrong with hibernating.
Yeah, I wanted to say I had a similar experience. Just a few days ago, I came back home I'm now living in Barcelona, to my apartment, and I was feeling miserable. I don't know why. I was just feeling really sad, and everything seemed to bother me. And I got to just sort of see past all the thoughts that were happening. I was just kind of sat there and noticing the desire to go to the fridge and get some food and pick up my phone and call someone and go online, and every time just being able to just witness it. And it's kind of what you were saying, Jenny, about sometimes, you know, just being sort of having the kindness to yourself and just being able to call someone. But in that moment, it just felt like there was this whole story I was just able to see right through, and I was just really connected to that beautiful place, but at the same time feeling the sadness. And that was quite unusual, because I didn't think I could be in both places at the same time. And as I allowed myself to just be sad, without giving it any reasoning or without letting it define me, but just being with it, there was a beautiful joy that came with it. And I just got to experience that and just sit with it and sit with the sadness and feel that well-being and that joy. And after a few hours, everything was looking very different.
It sounds like to be able to not judge your experience and need it to be different, need it to change.
Yeah, and it's also like when I'm sad, first thing I do is, why am I sad? And I have some really compelling reasons why that's true. And I can really trick myself into believing there's a reason why, other than I'm believing my thoughts right now. But it was just so something about it was just so pure, and it wasn't a strategy of, I'm going to sit with my sadness, I'm going to feel better. It just kind of happened, and afterwards, just 2 hours later, I just reflected on what had just happened, and I just got to see through how slippery everything can look like when you're not seeing it straight. So, yeah.
And that sounded to me like one of the most beautiful expressions of the principle of consciousness that I've ever heard, and how we can trick ourselves in thinking, I've got to get it right, kind of academically. What is the principle of mind and of consciousness and of thought and of want to say it to people and share it in order that they may get it? And just from your own rich experience, you've just taught me, a lot about the gift of consciousness, and just expressed it so beautifully in your witnessing of it unfolding in that experience. Thank you.
Can I say something about one of the big ahas for me? I've done a lot of personal growth stuff over the years. I've been relationships training.
Sorry, could you speak up a bit?
Positive thought. Sorry, positive thought. And then I've sort of come along to this, about 6 months ago or so. And one of the things I think really was a moment for me was realizing that the years of therapy had kept me very much stuck where I had been. And it's like, oh yes, here comes the sadness again. I better go and have another 6 months of therapy about it. And back we go into it. And, it's like, I'm so relieved I don't have to do any more therapy. It is such a relief. And it's like, I think there's a huge gift in initial therapy. I think, being much more aware of what's going on, I think is great. And then there's a time to say, enough now. It's like, let's just start living in the moment rather than continually going back to it. And I know some people have talked about PTSD and I'd love to see more of that sort of thing in this country. And, it excites me. It's like, yes, let's stop, just rehashing it all the time. So I'm thrilled about that. Thank you. It saved me a fortune.
It's another industry down the pen.
And most of my friends are therapists.
Not anymore.
We'll see.
Can I say, I think we all love a label as well. And that's-
Speak up, Mandy, please.
Sorry, but we all love a label as well. So I've been playing around recently what I would have called anxiety, I might now think of as excitement. And it's just, I've realised that all these labels, that particular mood is sadness, that particular mood is happiness, they're all mixed up now, they're just neutral, but for the meaning I give them. So I'm not frightened of them anymore. So Sid talks about not being frightened of our experience. If the experience is thought's made up. So I've been scared of made up stuff. The imaginary dragons. So all that kind of labelling is all topsy-turvy. And I'm seeing that a lot with children who are maybe labelled as anxious or stressed very young ages. And it's like, where does this come from? And actually it's all neutral. And that's quite exciting, I think. Because it allows the whole range of, I think Rudy talks about the piano, it allows us to play with all of the notes, not just the middle ones, without fear. And being in that, like you were saying, being in that fearful, or that kind of low place, if that's the right label, who knows what you're going to see while you're in there. It's quite exciting. Kind of rummage around and see what comes up. So it's a different experience of neutrality, I suppose.
I love what you said about invisible dragons, because what pops into my head is that each of us kind of creates an invisible knight to try and slay the invisible dragon. So like, without the judger in your own thoughts, it's just experience, which goes back to what you said at the beginning and what Sid said, if people weren't afraid of their experience. But like, the real you isn't afraid of your experience, it's who you think you are, thinks it's afraid of the experience. The invisible knight slaying invisible dragons. That could be a book, couldn't it?
I was thinking what you said as well about finding your own voice with this. Because at the conference, on one side of me, I kind of had one of my very respected teachers, mentors, who talks about it in one way. And then on the other side, I had another very respected mentor who talks about it completely differently. And I was just like, who am I going to please? It was really like, and I was just sitting there getting more and more like, and then I can't do either of them. I can't share like them. I can only share as me. And it was so nice to just get that off my head. Like, I can't. And I think if only one of them had been in the room, I know that I would have adjusted my language to fit in with them. And it was such a good moment for me to just go, me then. And it's easier to be us than it is to try and be someone else. And well, the thing is, one of the teachers I love listening to is Mara Gleason, and I love listening to her. But then when I come and see her on the breaks, I'm always a bit like, oh, I can't talk to you because you're so cool, and I want to talk like you. And then I just thought, at the last conference we did speak a bit, and then she sent me a message, and I'm just going to be honest with you, that I get all like awestruck around you, and I find it hard. It feels like there's an honesty that we allow ourselves to be a bit more honest with where we're at, so not trying to be something. So if you're feeling down or sad, you can be that. And I think, like, I've noticed there's been times when I've kind of been in that and I've been like right in the depths of stuff, and it's almost like someone said it on the last retreat, then I was a bit hungry and I was like, I'm probably overindulging myself a little bit in my misery. And she got up and went and had something to eat, and I realised that sometimes I want to overindulge in misery, or I want to overindulge in this kind of feeling, and that's all right too. Like this idea of our personality being perfect or trying to get somewhere, I don't know, this isn't serious. This is so, like I said, it's light. And it's everywhere, and teachers are everywhere. It's in life. Not just in a conference or with someone that sat in the front of the room, like everyone's sharing. Like, I love what you said. You heard something about consciousness and what you'd said. Like we're built for life.
That sounded just amazing. What I'm hearing in different ways, heard it here, heard it from Mandy, heard it from you, Jenny, that life is bubbling up, all the time, and we can either push it down and make it wrong and be waiting for something else, or we can allow it to bubble up, and then we can celebrate it both in ourselves and in other people. Because I noticed that in myself, looking back, in one way I could feel very sad about it, that I have a real sense, even sitting here this afternoon, that here I am witnessing in other people, and have done in clients and in all sorts of other ways, a delightfulness of life bubbling up, whether it is under the covers, under the duvet, whether it's with another client, whether it's in a story, looking at another principles practitioner, whatever it is, feeling life bubbling up and it all being all right, because it is life expressing itself in me and in you and in each person that we are with. And yet, I'm 57 years of age now, and for the last, I could even say 56, or even, recently, I can catch myself again now. At least I can see it, I can be aware of it. But I forced life down, always thought I was meant to be some other way. And now, letting it be, like Philippe in his apartment, and like you under the duvet, and like you saying to a fellow in the principles, what you felt in that moment is just delicious. And
Can I just ask you guys a question, or everyone really? Have you ever caught yourself laughing at yourself in public?
yes, this minute in public.
Yeah, and you weren't too bothered about the embarrassment, but you did feel when you suddenly realised where you were. And thought, you get strangely, you realise you're talking to yourself like that. When you catch yourself and you're thinking of it, it's like the power. You realise your own power, the choice, the acceptance. Okay, this is how I feel. I'm not going to try to fight it. That realising that choice, where the power is, the acceptance. And just that release also from the social, conditioning, the natural conditioning, because that's the right thing to do. You teach right from wrong, this is good, this is bad, that's acceptable, that's unacceptable. You just get to just distance yourself away from it, and you're connected on that deeper level, rather than the level of training and indoctrination.
I had a really cool conversation with Ishka, my niece, when we were in the Lake District, and it was a really hot day, so with my mum and dad, Dave was there, so Dave had taken his shirt off and tucked it in his shirt. He goes, Jenny, why is it that Dave's allowed to walk along without a top on, but you're not? I said, well, that's a made up rule. She said, what do you mean? Well, I said, well, it's just made up. This is what it's like in our country. There's actually some countries where that isn't the rule, like in some African tribes and things. She's like, oh. So then she's like, well, I'm really hot, can I take my shirt off? And I said, yeah, it's fine. She goes, but children are allowed, aren't they? And I was like, yeah. She goes, well, what age is it? And it was such a beautiful conversation. Then we started, I got my dad in on it, because I think I took it a little bit, I don't know where to go with this. And he started explaining about when some of these rules came about, and the Victorians, and started to just open our mind a bit to this idea that what we think is true, and what we think is how life should be, is made up. Like there's so many things that are really helpful that have been made up in society, so it's not to just laugh about all of it and say it's a made up rule, but just to start to see and you start to question what we've taken to be true. And to see her at 9, like, oh, this is made up. This isn't the truth, that it's wrong for women to walk around without their tops on. It's just been made up in our culture, and we all stick by that rule. But it was just, I don't know, it was so nice to see that questioning. Like what I thought to be true might not be, like it might be made up. And I think we get so fixed on our ideas of how things should be. And when you're talking about it, I was thinking, I don't necessarily know if I've had the experience of talking to myself. I know that I've had laughter at times when I really probably shouldn't be laughing, and just thinking, oh, no, I shouldn't laugh, no, I shouldn't, but not being able to stop it. But it's that idea again, well, I don't know if a child would have that same experience of I shouldn't be laughing now. They just freely express. Whereas we learn very early that in this situation you're like this, and in this situation you're like this, and we just try and mould ourselves. And I know that some of it's been really helpful. Like I think within a school system, I was talking to my dad, oh, isn't it ridiculous they're not allowed to dye their hair, and why are they only allowed one stud in their ears? And he was like, well, the thing is, it's like, when do you then draw the line? So they've just had to do like a blanket rule with certain things, because otherwise it can so I can see why some of it makes sense, but I still question it. 2 minutes. Any questions? 1 minute. 1 minute. Or comments?
Tomorrow is going to be a topless day for all.
Not more rules.
Why wait, Sue?
Because I can't make it tomorrow, isn't that a shame? That was so lovely speaking for me and for everybody else.
Thank you.